Just over 100 years ago, China's first ever modern police force played a leading role in a pivotal event in Chinese history, the Wuchang Uprising, a rebellion that snowballed into the 1911 revolution that swept the Qing dynasty into history. The decisions they made amidst the chaos and uncertainty of those days changed the course of history. The impact they had on China continues to be felt to this very day. Night and day, the Yangtze flows on, ceaselessly, eternally. From the top of Turtle Mountain in Wuhan, you can see the three towns that are the core of the city. Wuchang lies across the river to the south. But turn your eyes to the north, and you'll see the Han River, Hankou on one bank, Hanyang on the other. This area was once known as Yangxia. In 1911, a battle took place here, a battle that changed the course of Chinese history. This was a battle that Wang Bingqian took part in, though he was not a soldier. He was actually a policeman, deputy commandant of the Provisional Police Force set up by the Hubei military government in the aftermath of the Warchang Uprising. One of his main tasks was to rally the people of Wuchang around the revolutionary cause, to bring them together in such a way that law and order could be guaranteed in these times of chaos. One fact made this vitally important. The 30,000 troops of the Qing army marching towards Wuhan, determined to reassert Qing authority in the region. The Revolutionary Army needed every trained uniformed man they could lay their hands on, including the police. Until the emergency was over, the people of Wuchang would have to police themselves.
Wuhan 的地理位置实在是太重要了。一方面，它处于长江的中游，如果武汉失守，清军就可以顺江东下，攻占革命军在江南的据点。另一方面，武汉在地理位置上居于全国的中心部位，从政治角度来考虑，它是一个比较适合开国会的地方。如果全国各地的议员可以集中在武汉召开临时国会，那么革命军的力量就可以获得政治上的合法性的支持。
In October 1911, Edward Dingle, a 31-year-old Englishman known to many by his Chinese name Ding Lermei, arrived in Wuhan. He was the special correspondent of the Chinese press, and over the following months, his readers would come to associate one phrase in particular with Dingle and his reports: the omnipresent Chinese boys, a reference to the young boys beaming with hope and excitement. According to him, these boys could be seen rushing all around the city. In a sense, they were perhaps not so different from Dingle himself. He too had found himself thrown into a combat zone with all its high drama and excitement. Dingle was struck by how bright and well-lit the streets of Wuhan were after nightfall. He didn't have to look far to find out why. Most houses had a lantern hanging outside the door by order of the Provisional Police Force. Well-lit streets, so the thinking went, deterred thieves and robbers, and, of course, Qing spies. Households were also required to provide one male to join the militias that patrolled the streets day and night. The steps the police had taken to guarantee public order in Wuchang played a vital role in ensuring the success of the Revolutionary Army. According to a contemporary newspaper report, people fled in panic, but returned to find that their houses hadn't been broken into. None of the valuables they had left behind were missing. Without these measures, it would have been far more difficult for the police to have played a role in the Liujiamiao victory on October the 19th, in which the Revolutionary Army halted the advance of the Qing Army at Liujiamiao to the north of Hankou. News of this success made it to Shanghai. There, the city's printers could barely keep up with demand for newspapers generated by reports of this stunning victory.
在辛亥革命发生之后，各地的媒体舆论的报道也呈现在武汉一样的舆论的局势，也就是说，绝大多数都是赞成甚至呼应这样革命的一种形式。
As news of the Warchang Uprising spread, other provinces followed suit. Soon, no less than a dozen provinces had shaken off the Qing and declared themselves independent. Jiangsu and Shanghai were organizing all-female death squads, and there was even a song, the Women's Revolutionary Army, written for them. However, the revolution had a less romantic side. On October the 20th, Qing agents were found operating in the city. Suspicions were aroused when two men with large barrels were seen lurking around a well. They were arrested and brought to Provisional Police Headquarters for questioning. Upon investigation, the barrels were found to contain poison. Immediately, messengers were sent out to warn locals not to use water from the wells. The two agents were summarily executed, as were all the many spies caught by the Provisional Police Force during the uprising. On October the 20th, the Revolutionary Army suffered a setback. The Qing Army launched a counterattack. The revolutionaries, overwhelmed by the superior firepower of the Qing loyalists, were forced to retreat to Dajirmen railway station. Nowadays, Dajirmen railway station is largely obscured by modern high-rise buildings, yet it still stands out. It stood out even more a century ago. Then, the station buildings offered the only cover available to the revolutionaries as they were driven out of Hankou. It was to be the scene of some of the bitterest fighting in the entire conflict. Edwin Dingle was on the front line. He reported that the revolutionaries, still wearing the Qing uniforms they'd been issued with and nothing to distinguish themselves from the enemy but white armbands on their left arms, mounted a desperate last-ditch defense of every corner, every nook and cranny of the station. Dingle described how they held the Qing army off for 3 days, their faces blackened with powder, going without sleep and food. After 4 days, the superior training and equipment of the Qing army began to tell. The station fell, and the Qing troops breached the Dajirmen line. When this hit the headlines of the newspapers in Shanghai, the Shanghai News spelt out the bitter blow in several words. Hankou will fall.
在汉口大直门失守之后呢，上海的《申报》及时的做了一个中立的一个客观的表述，但是老百姓不答应，民意不答应，民意认为这个是不好的消息，认为是造谣，认为是故意跟革命作对。
The angry citizens even smashed up the offices of the newspaper. But in reality, with the loss of more than 10,000 revolutionary troops, the fall of Hankou and the failure of the whole uprising seems just a matter of time. All over the country answered his call. These became the core of the so-called death squads, young men who were prepared to follow Huang across the river and give up their lives to retake Hankou.
当时由于革命军和清军之间力量对比过于悬殊，革命军完全是靠着一种革命热情在进行这场战斗，所以整个形势可以说是越来对革命军越不利。
Yet it was doubtful that they would even get to Hankou. From the high ground across the city, Qing artillery could pick off any boats crossing the river, and they frequently did. Edwin Dingle photographed the aftermath of a direct hit on a boat that left 28 dead and 26 people seriously wounded. Only 22 soldiers were rescued. Over in Hankou, the revolutionaries clung on desperately. They hid in its maze of lanes, sniping at Qing troops through windows and from behind shattered walls. Finally, on November the 1st, Qing Army Commander Feng Guozhang, unable to dislodge the tenacious rebels, gave the order to raze the city to the ground.
Tangshi Feng Guozhang 为了鼓舞士气，还专门编了一句口号，叫“打下汉口，黄金万斗，人人升官，美女抢走”。正是在这句口号的不恰当的引导之下，整个汉口变成了人间地狱。
News of the outrages inflicted on Hankou filtered down to Shanghai. Lurid reports of looting, murder and rape frequently made the front pages of the Shanghai News. In their savage campaign to break the resistance of the rebels, the Qing troops took no prisoners. In one incident, 400 students and soldiers of the military surveying school were put to death on the orders of the Qing commander, despite the fact that they had surrendered and laid down their weapons. It was an act of butchery that outraged public opinion across the country. Early the next morning, Li Yuanhong and his subordinates made their way up Snake Mountain on the south bank of the Yangtze. Over in Hankou, he recalled, flames stretched up to the sky, smoke mingling with clouds, nothing but a thick, pitch-black pall of smoke as far as the eye could see. Edwin Dingle got a close-up from the relative safety of Hankou's foreign concessions. He described in vivid detail the way the blaze would flare up die down, then flare up again, as if it were playing cat and mouse with the city, torturing it, stringing out its death. Hankou, he reported, had become a city of death. In the foreign concession of Hankou, there was a fire brigade to put out the fire. But in areas outside of the concession, there was nothing they could do to stop the fire from spreading. The fires burned for 5 days and 5 nights. The Qing Army's campaign of murder, rape and pillage lasted longer. By the time it came to an end, the once bustling port of Hankou was gutted, a ghost of its former glory. This map was drawn by Edwin Dingle. The areas marked black were completely destroyed. But despite the artillery fire and the devastation of the city, people still attempted to cross the river and carry on the fight. Among them, a force of 200 officers of the Provisional Police, led by Wang Bingqian. As they got ready to embark, soldiers coming back across the river left them in no doubt. The situation in Hankou was desperate. 200 extra fighters was but a drop in the ocean. Wang Bingqian and his men decided to go anyway.
这样一种混乱的局面，导致我们几乎都已经是背水一战，几乎完全没有任何回旋的余地。所以这场仗再继续打下去，其实可以说是非常的惨烈了。所以到最后，我们看到很多敢死队在渡江的过程当中又纷纷死亡，整个革命军损失惨重。
On November the 3rd, the Hubei military government announced that Wang Xing was to take command of the Revolutionary Army. It was determined to cling on to Hankou, and men continued to stream across the river. The 2011 film The Revolution of 1911 reimagines the battle. But in reality, after the Great Blaze, the Revolutionary Army was almost finished. As some of their comrades had warned them, Wang Bingqian and his 200 men made little difference. They did get across the river, but then one by one they withdrew, unable to hold back the Qing onslaught. On November the 27th, Hanyang fell. Now the entire north bank of the Yangtze was occupied by Qing forces. With artillery on Turtle Mountain trained on Wuchang, which was in range, the revolutionaries' position looked hopeless. In fact, the situation looked worse than hopeless. When the Hubei military government had relocated to remote areas, the army had gone with them. Without soldiers, how could the city be defended? The answer was the Provisional Police Force. On December the 1st, the assault began. As He Shifan of the Hubei military government recorded in his journal, on the stroke of 7 this morning, our enemies unleashed a massive artillery barrage against Wuchang. Our headquarters is destroyed, and people have fled and the army has withdrawn. The outlook for us is bleak. The Qing army's relentless shelling devastated the city. Demoralized, the few people who remained in the city, convinced of the failure of the revolution and a Qing comeback, abandoned their Western-style hats and reverted to the traditional skull caps that met with Qing approval. provisional police played a vital role in combating this spirit of despondency and defeatism. Officers were sent around the city to dispel rumours and raise morale. Their campaign was a success. After a few days, the mood began to lift. But on December the 2nd, a patrol came under artillery fire. Four police officers lost their lives. Up to that point, the Revolutionary Army had lost more than 10,000 men since the beginning of the Warchang Uprising. The precise number of civilian deaths is unknown, but it's estimated to exceed 30,000. But crucial developments were taking place outside Wuhan. On December the 2nd, the United Jiangsu Zhejiang Revolutionary Army took Nanjing. Now the whole of China south of the Yangtze was in the hands of the revolutionaries. As cold winds started to blow in from the north, Edward Dingle left Wuhan for Shanghai to find out what was going on. By now, songs were being heard up and down the country, north and south of the Yangtze. The Wuchang Uprising had sparked off a nationwide revolution. In the 2 months following the Wuchang Uprising, 17 provinces rebelled against the Qing government. When the fighting was over in Wuhan, delegates from these provinces gathered in Shanghai for a constitutional convention. They were there to discuss the future of the whole country. On December the 25th, revolutionary leader Sun Yat-sen arrived in Shanghai. The Qing representative Tang Xiaoyi was also in Shanghai. The war was over, but the talks had only just begun. The representative from Shanxi, Ma Lingfu, wrote about what happened in Nanjing on New Year's Day 1912. He described scenes of jubilation and excitement, cheering and shouting that woke up the local residents. Some, understandably, took them for stragglers and troublemakers. The idea that these revellers were, in fact, provincial representatives with the destiny of the country in their hands would have struck them as absurd. Just an hour before, Sun Yat-sen had been sworn in as provisional president of the Republic of China. 42 days later, 6 days before Chinese New Year, the Empress Dowager Long Yu issued an edict and Emperor Puyi abdicated. The Qing dynasty, the dynasty that had ruled China for more than 200 years, was at an end. The action-packed year of 1911 was also coming to an end. After the 1911 revolution, some of the police officers who had taken part in the Wuchang Uprising were asked to write a short autobiography for the archives of the new republic. Their names were Gao Yuanfan, Wang Bingqian, Yang Li, Wu Piji, Dong Tianren, Hu Zongyao, Zhang Kaixuan, Gu Qingyun, Li Guoyong, Xiong Yifei, and Wang Siyuan. They will always be remembered for the part they played in something new and revolutionary, China's first modern police force.